Well, welcome to the journey. My name is Kevin Polkey, and I'm the host of the journey. And today we have a return guest. Heather Baker been a friend of mine for a long time. I think we met when we both were speaking at Rockford University for a symposium a few years ago for the local school districts. But Heather, welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me. For those who don't know me, I'm a sudden cardiac arrest survivor and a local educator. So I think I'm going into my 14th year in education in the state line area of Illinois. I just finished 6 years as principal at Simon Elementary School in Winnebago, and I'll be starting a new journey as director of teaching and learning in Rockton this school year.
Perfect. Well, Heather, when you are, you're a pretty busy lady. You're involved in a lot of different things, and we'll get into that in a moment. You have a little one. You're married and have a son. But when you have the opportunity to have fun, what do you do for fun?
Oh gosh, well, we just started potty training, so fun sounds very far away. Those are the days of the past. But, my idea of fun is just a little bit different than other people. I'm a very social person, so obviously I love to get together with friends too. I love to travel, primarily warm places, sports, concerts, all of those things. But fun for me comes down to a lot of also personal development. I recently started a nonprofit. I like to do CPR training. I'm writing a book. And when people ask me, how do you have time to do those things? I realize that that's what I use my fun time for is these other side projects that really do just bring me a lot of joy and fill my cup.
Well, and how do you say it? I resemble that. It's much the same type of thing, and I've got an opportunity here in the next few days. My son-in-law Kevin, who's an educator as well. We were planning on going on a Boundary Waters canoe trip. We were supposed to leave on Friday, but because of the forest fires, it got
Oh.
ended up getting canceled. So I am after taping this, I have a couple meetings today, and then I'm going to head up to our lake home to just do some writing and get ready for the upcoming school year with some seminars and workshops. So I'm kind of in the same way. I enjoy that creative aspect of putting content together and then being able to present as I know you do as well.
Yeah, I love that. And I think I used to view it as, or maybe other people see it as, you're always working, but those projects, are not my primary job. It's not how I make my money. And I just really enjoy, using that creative outlet. So I love it. And I'm always excited. I've got lots of thoughts in my head. So when I have that free time, I'm ready to get it down on paper.
Perfect. So, if you could, for some new listeners, if you could maybe just tell a little bit of your story about what happened a few years ago, because that was obviously a defining moment in your life. And really was a transformational piece of where you're at today. And so, yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit, tell the audience a little bit about what happened a few years ago and what's come out of that since then.
Sure. So I had started my career as a middle school band teacher and decided after a couple of years of teaching that I wanted to go into leadership. I had really fallen in love with reading about, learning about leadership. I got my master's in administration and decided to take a job in Pecatonica as a curriculum director. So in the 27-28 school year, or 2017-2018, I apologize, my goodness. I had just started my first job as a school administrator in Pecatonica, and I was working really hard to make a name for myself. I was young, I was a band teacher, and I had a lot of doubt surrounding me about whether or not I could handle this job. And so I was really working hard to prove myself. Come February 1st, 2018, I was 28. I was in that first year grinding, trying to learn the position. I walked into a meeting, was talking to colleagues, and all of a sudden felt like I was going to be sick. I looked at the person across from me and I tried to tell her, I think I'm going to get sick, but no words came out. And my heart literally stopped, not figuratively. My heart stopped of sudden cardiac arrest. I fell face first into the table, hit my face, flopped back onto the floor. Fortunately for me, my colleagues had had CPR training just 1 month prior. Bill Fowler, the superintendent at the time, was also a Marine, so very brave, had been trained for years on emergency preparedness. He jumped in right away and started CPR. Tim King, the middle school principal at the time, arrived a couple of minutes later, and together they performed CPR and used the school's AED to shock my heart 3 times. Now, what I've come to learn about sudden cardiac arrest is less than 9% of victims survive because most bystanders don't do CPR. Bystander CPR rates are around 30%. And so usually a victim collapses, people stand there, they don't know what to do. And you have to receive CPR within the first 3 to 5 minutes, hopefully an AED shock within those first 3 to 5 minutes to be able to survive. I was placed into a coma, wasn't waking up. The next day, fortunately, did wake up. They took the tubes out. They asked me my name. They asked me what day it was, which I never know. But I said, I think it just turned February. And they were like, okay, February 2nd. And then they said, and who's the president? And I said, no, thank you. I don't like to talk about politics. And they laughed. They called my family. They said, we think she's going to be okay. And I owe that all entirely to Bill, Tim, and the team at Pecatonica, EMS, doctors, nurses who saved my life that day. After that, I was only in the hospital 2 weeks and they sent me back to work after just the 2 weeks. Went right back into work. I dove in. And I started advocating for CPR and AED in schools. CPR training. At this point, I've trained over 5,000 people. I've passed 2 laws in Illinois, and really, it's a passion and it's an obsession to make sure that everybody knows what to do when a cardiac emergency occurs, so that we can increase those survival rates.
So well, that's an amazing story, and even though I've heard you share that story in different settings, it's still always an amazing. Did you have any idea that this could have happened? I mean, did any history, any cardiac history for you, any cardiac history in your family?
I really had no clue. I was an athletic kid. I was always a multi-sport athlete in travel softball, very healthy, very fit. Fitness was a priority of mine. The only thing that had occurred was at one point in college, a doctor had thought she heard a slight murmur. So, out of an abundance of caution, she sent me for an echocardiogram, and they found nothing that would have been dangerous. So, really going into this, I was working out, exercising, and didn't have much of an idea. Other than, and really that's the narrative I pushed for a long time, but I want to lead you towards, what I've learned about stress. And so I had been working really hard at Pecatonica, just burning the candle at both ends. I was staying up late, waking up early, skipping meals, really neglecting my wellness, also that I could focus on this job, learning everything about preschool through 12th grade, every subject area as a band teacher to make sure that I could confidently hold this position. And about a month before February 1st occurred, I started feeling really run down. I started having migraines that weren't my normal chronic migraines. They were different. My body felt really heavy and sluggish. I was starting to have some memory loss things, but really I ignored it. I just kept pushing. And I said, I'm not going to take a day off of work. That would make me look weak. That would make me look irresponsible. I don't want people gossiping, which was the wrong mindset to have, but that's what I thought at the time. And so I really pushed through that. And at first, I was not willing to admit that I had been feeling that way. But now I'm more open about saying I didn't feel well leading up to it. Certainly nothing that would have thought your heart's going to stop and you're going to drop dead. However, I felt sick enough that I could have gone to my doctor. And had I done that with a basic blood test, they would have found that my potassium was super low, which is what caused my cardiac arrest. They could have given me an over-the-counter supplement, and my cardiac arrest would have never happened. So, really, what it came down for me was ignoring those signs that my body was giving me and refusing to miss work for just 1 hour to go to the doctor.
Mhm. And so leading into our conversation that we had even before we started, taping today, that both of us, consider fun, our side
Huh?
projects, right?
Yeah.
So where do you think, and you didn't use this word, this is just a term that came to me when you were talking, but when do you think the overachiever, that mindset
Uh-huh.
of over When do you think that started? If you look back prior to February of 18, when do you think that started, or when did it kick into a whole nother level?
Well, let me tell you, I was born with an A plus blood type. So I don't know if I had an option, but even my blood type is A plus. And, my parents had very high expectations for us, which I'm grateful for myself and my sister. And we were both taught that, when you do something, you give it your all, you do your best. And so I think, and, I even see it in my son, even without me saying those things to him. He's a perfectionist and overachiever by nature, and I'm trying to teach him some coping skills at only 3 years old because I'm like, wait a minute, don't be so hard on yourself like I am hard. So I think nature and nurture from the beginning of time for me that I always was this competitive spirit. I was always a perfectionist, and then just not wanting to disappoint the people around me was always there for me. And you would think that when somebody experiences sudden cardiac arrest, I died, was given this second chance at life, you would think I would go back to work with this brand new mindset. And ultimately, what I write about in my book is that that's not what I did. I went back to work feeling embarrassed. So, as a person who was trying to look perfect, now I showed a weakness, right? And it seems ridiculous to say that this felt embarrassing to me, but I felt embarrassed. I had missed work, I had missed deadlines, I hadn't been able to complete projects. And now I showed up and I fell back into all of the same routines, but with lower capacity, with post traumatic stress disorder, working in the same office where I had collapsed, with coworkers who were trying to process their own trauma and weren't receiving support for that. And really, I started having more and more cardiac issues. And they would send me to the hospital. I would get checked out. They'd say, there's no reason why this should be happening. Are you eating well, sleeping well? Are you managing your stress? And I would lie. I always say, I think everybody lies, right? At some point when the doctor's like, do you drink a lot of caffeine? You're like, no, but you are. And so I was like, yeah, no, I'm fine. And ultimately, it led to a really huge panic attack. And I was driving to work down Telegraph Road. I started to have palpitations. I started to feel dizzy and anxious, and I thought I was going to have a sudden cardiac arrest. Now, I have an implanted device, which will shock me if this happens, but you still don't really want to collapse while driving. So I pulled over. I called Tim King. I said, oh my gosh, I think I'm having cardiac arrest. I need you to come get me. I'm so scared. I'm so scared. He drove out on Telegraph, picked me up, drove me to school. My mom drove from the suburbs, got my car, took me up to Madison. And it was in that moment that I was like, I am quitting my job. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I can't do this job anymore. And I placed the blame on the job. And I said, this is just a really stressful field. If you work in education or medicine, you understand, like, it's just too much. I don't know what I'm going to do. It's my passion, but I'm going to have to figure something else out. And luckily for me, shortly after that, I heard a podcast, and it was Brene Brown with the authors, the Nagoski sisters, who wrote a book about burnout, unlocking the stress cycle. I'm probably saying that wrong now.
Yep, you got it. Yep.
Okay. And that podcast changed my life. And where I had been blaming the job for the stress, I started to look at myself and how I was managing stress. And they taught me that there are things called stress cycles, and you're supposed to close these stress cycles. And if you don't, you start getting burnt out. And I realized the things I'm doing are not setting me up for success. I'm ignoring Maslow's hierarchy. I'm not even meeting my basic needs, and something has to change. And this really is what catapulted me into studying stress, wellness, frameworks of wellness, and taking a look at myself. And I can stay very busy, but I can have boundaries that set me up to be successful. I have boundaries for what I take on and what I don't take on. And I have ways for acknowledging when I'm getting stressed and closing those stress cycles. And so I think people like you and I can still be highly productive, stay super active, but then also have a framework for ourselves in which we don't get burnt out.
Yeah. No, you know that those sisters, the twins, the Degosky sisters, I was introduced to them similar, and it changed not only me and my own way that I was looking at my daily and weekly lifestyle, but also when I'm teaching about managing stress and developing resilience, that if we don't complete that threat response cycle, then we're essentially wondering it's going to all that adrenaline is going to disrupt
Hmm.
our sleep cycles. It causes agitation, all the things that you just talked about, and we're never refueling. We're never getting to a
No.
place where our bodies are recuperating, right? So yeah, I think yeah, that's interesting. I didn't realize that that was part of the story um,
Yeah.
like a turning point for you was listening to that podcast and getting that information as well.
It was. And there was this lady, I feel bad because I was scrolling Instagram, probably because I was researching stress and the Nagoski sisters. So I got an ad about stress, right?
Yep.
And she was doing a webinar and she was like, click to sign up for my webinar. She's like, are you stressed? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, you are the problem. It's not your job. It's how you manage your stress. And if you don't fix it, you're going to be burnt out in every job you go to. And I was like, that's not nice. And that's not true. And I scrolled past and then I reflected more. And the more I learned, I realized I'm so sorry to that woman because she's entirely right. I had been going through my whole life from relationship to job to scenario in which I was always blaming the stress rather than looking at how I was coping from stress. And I've had other traumatic incidents in my life other than the sudden cardiac arrest and a rather high ACEs score. And so when you combine trauma and how your body holds that stress with always being in an open stress cycle, I was not okay. And one of the biggest things I learned, as somebody who I was trained in instrumental music, I was not trained in physiology and anatomy and all these other things. I didn't know the impact that stress had on your heart, that it had on your body. And what I've learned is that chronic stress at the lowest level, weight gain, acid reflux, migraines, issues with your hormonal cycles, and then as it gets worse, increased risk of early onset Alzheimer's. That runs in my family. Premature death, heart attacks, people being stressed all the time changes even your DNA. So, the more I've learned about this over the last couple of years, I've just gotten so excited, and I'm putting that into a book called Stress to Death to talk about how really I love to exaggerate and I love to speak in hyperbole, but you really can be stressed to death if you leave these things out of control and your heart will start to break down, your major organs will start to break down, and that'll be the end. And I just spoke about this about a month ago at a conference, and a woman came up to me and she said she had to have a significant portion of her bowels removed because they couldn't figure out what was going on with her body. And it turned out it was chronic stress. So it's very real. And it's been exciting for me to learn about these stress cycles and how we can manage them and how it actually is pretty easy to close a stress cycle.
And so, yes, and I think, and there's a lot of different things that can lead to this constantly being in a fight or flight. And
Yeah.
and so, obviously there are actual threats, right? Meaning like deadlines and certain things, but it also could be our expectation that we may have on ourselves to,
Yes.
to want to please, to want to get approval, validation, to want to be seen a certain way. So
Mm.
something that, someone else may not see as a threat, you and I may see as a threat because we want to achieve something or we want to not fail or
Yes.
however that may be, because it's that internalization of that circumstance or event or situation that's really where the stress comes from.
Absolutely. And so going back to that embarrassment when I felt when I came back to work, one of the most beautiful things I've learned from Brene Brown, and I pretend I know her and I wish to know her someday, but just about how big of a trigger shame is for me and for everyone truly. But what I have found is my biggest emotional reactions were always from those feelings of shame, whether somebody else would find it shameful or not. Like Most people would probably die and come back to work and be like, I'm pretty proud. Look at what I overcame. I felt shame from that. And that was my reality at that time. And so I've gotten better at getting to the root of my own emotions and saying, let's peel back another layer. Because oftentimes for me, I get that kind of angry response. But when I peel it back, it's embarrassment or it's shame. And so I've gotten better at digging down to see what it is. And exactly, you can't judge somebody for what triggers their trauma or their stress response. It's going to be different for every single person based on their history and their perception and who they are.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, I mean, just recently having gone through something that I didn't realize at the time. It was I had in 2017 I had a hiking accident where I ruptured my quadricep tendon and had to have emergency surgery after they took me off the mountain and a little bit less than 2 years ago or a year and a half ago I had hip replacement surgery. And so in the midst of those two things and a couple other things, as I was getting ready for this canoe trip, I noticed that my confidence was really low from a physical
Oh,
standpoint because we're going to spend 5 days, canoeing and portaging and sleeping in a tent and all these things. And so this idea of vulnerability, I didn't realize it at the time, but that vulnerability to the unknown of what was the expectation, I noticed um, I had responded with my confidence being really low. And
yeah.
even though I was continually preparing for it, I couldn't figure out what was going on until finally wrestling with it, writing about it, journaling about it, recognizing that it had to do with this being in this vulnerable place,
Yeah.
taken out of my comfort zone, or projecting I was going to be taken out of my comfort zone or familiar zone, and that was where that I noticed that I was even though I was looking forward to it, there was this aspect of stress regarding now. I was doing my breathing, I was doing the journaling, I was doing, doing the things that I knew how to do to complete the threat response cycle.
Hmm.
But I had this thing until I finally worked through and realized where it was coming from. I kept going back to the same place of that stress, like you said.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that's a great point that you have to be able to name it. And even if it's that person cut me off when I was driving on the way to work. And, it can be something small, so to say, or it can be something really deep. And I think doubting your body is a big thing. And that was something I experienced. I never knew at 28 years old, healthy, going to the gym 5, 6, 7 days a week, that your heart could just stop out of nowhere and you could just drop dead. And so, it created a new vulnerability for me as well that, oh my goodness, my heart can just stop. You can just drop dead at any second. It's not something you normally think about. So doubting your body can be really alarming, for the first time.
Well, and I imagine as an athlete, as a competitive athlete, as a musician, you probably, like myself, had gotten affirmation and validation for pushing through pain zones,
Yes.
for out disciplining, pushing yourself to out discipline, outwork other individuals, and so at least for me, it's really hard for me to pay attention to those signs when it used to be my secret sauce to
Yes.
like when I was in competition, right? And regardless if it was an actual competition or if it was just at my job, right? And so
Yeah.
I think that I had to relearn, or I am relearning how to actually listen. So
Mhm.
I would have, yeah, I remember after having my hip surgery, and this was again less than 2 years ago. The one company that I do consulting work for, they go, "Oh, you're having surgery. How many weeks do you think you're going to be off?" I'm like, "I'll be back next Tuesday." But
Right.
that's 6 days from now. It'll be fine. And
Mhm.
I mean, I took 3 days off. I mean, what's the
Right. Like, got to get back at it.
right? And because if I'm in discomfort at home, I might as well be here. And
Right.
so
Exactly.
and I so it's an old and familiar pattern that I constantly have to be aware of.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that with me. And I totally relate to that. And I think you nailed it with the way you described it, that that's what we were praised for, and that's how we were able to succeed. And I could outwork other people, and I could compartmentalize, and you would never know that I was in pain or hurting or sick. Or I've had chronic migraine since I was 7. I've gone to school with 14 days straight of a migraine. My parents didn't let me stay home sick. So I learned how to function. And we had a joke in our family. My mom would always say, who's a wonderful person, so please no judgment, but she would say, take an ibuprofen and let's go. It would just be, you got an ailment, take an ibuprofen and go to the next practice, go to the next game, the competition. We don't got time to whine about it. Let's just go, right? And so that has been something for me, and that I've been aware of in raising my son, of validating those feelings and that it's okay to rest and that things can wait. It's actually one of my favorite stories that I'll share in my book too, is that when I woke up from my coma, one of the first things I did was, obviously I was very confused about what had happened. And my parents said it was like the movie 50 First Dates, if you're familiar, where it's Drew Barrymore and she keeps forgetting everything every day, and then they have their first date every day. So my parents, my husband were at the hospital. I would say, what happened? My head hurts. They would tell me. Within minutes, I would forget and I would ask again. But eventually, after a couple minutes, I said, can I have my phone? And they were hesitant. And I said, no, I really need my phone. And they thought, well, maybe she's going to post on Facebook, hey, everybody, I'm okay. It's me. Maybe I'm going to text friends, hey, I'm okay. Um, so I get my phone. I'm so excited and I'm in it, and they don't know what I'm doing. And then all of a sudden, my husband walks in and he said, one of your coworkers just told me that you're sending work emails. Give me your phone back. I got busted. They tattled on me. But the very first thing I did, I don't even remember those first couple of days. So, coming out of a coma, the first thing I did was want to work. And
Yeah.
that to me highlights the sickness of it, the addiction, the worry, the value that I had tied. I was so worried because there was an institute day, and I was responsible for making all the schedules and the professional development. And I think I had actually already missed the day, but I was like, I need to send this schedule out. This is my main priority, and I was so anxious and so nervous that that's the first thing I thought about when coming out of a coma. And so, reflecting on that, I do think that there's a lot of people who would feel the same way. And I think it's relatable. In our society, we are so tied to work, and my value has been tied to my work output for a long time. It was tied to my French horn playing for a long time, which led to a lot of performance anxiety because if I missed a note, it wasn't just a note, it's that I felt like a bad person. And so it's something I've had to really work on too, is separating my value from my performance. But what a key indicator that something was wrong, that that's the first thing I did.
Yeah, yeah. No, and that was for me when I was bodybuilding. First, it was football and wrestling and track, and then later bodybuilding. And I didn't realize it at the time when bodybuilding ended for me. My identity of who I was as a person had been wrapped up with being a competitive athlete, and I
Mm.
stayed longer than I should have. I knew that it was over. I just kept going because I was afraid of who would I be. Who would I be if I didn't compete? And thank goodness, not at the time I wasn't thinking, but later, if it wouldn't have ended the way it did, I don't know if I would have gone willingly. And the same thing happened. I remember it when I couldn't differentiate between Kevin and Kevin Polke and KP counseling. I had enmeshed the two and kind of
Yes.
fused the two, and I couldn't separate. And I've learned that there's a certain phrases that I'll use when I'm getting close to that.
Ooh, what
Like
are they?
I have to. I never. I can't. I speak in these
Mhm.
absolutes like no, I can't take any time off right now. No, I need to see so many. No, I need to. I have to. If I don't, it'll never. And then I know at that point, those are indicators for me that Kevin, it's happening again. You're
Yeah.
you're fusing your identity in with this whatever the project is, whatever the source is, because those are indicators that I'm doing it again type of thing.
Oh, I love that. That's one of the things that when I do my speaking, I like to do this activity in which I ask people to introduce themselves to somebody in the room that they don't know, but you can't tell them your job title, or a personal relationship. I can't just say, "Hi, I'm Heather. I'm a mom. I'm a sister. I'm a daughter." Those are all very important things, but it's not who I am. It's a relationship. And so it's hard. People giggle, they're uncomfortable, and I watch them sit in the pause for quite some time and think, I'm Heather. I love going to concerts. I love true crime and true crime podcasts. I love to rescue animals. Love the beach. I always wanted to be a dolphin trainer when I was growing up. To really think about who you are aside from your job. So many people just say, "Hi, I'm Heather Baker. I'm a principal." And that's
Mm.
it. You don't know that person. So
Yeah.
trying to figure out who you are is step one. And what I have found through the research is that people who have a strong sense of identity and self have much lower rates of burnout and higher job satisfaction. Because aside from whatever mess you've got going on at work, you could have a great situation, you could have a bad situation. If you know who you are and you know that there's more to you outside of that job situation, you're going to be happier. It just makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's a great question to wrestle with, right?
Yeah.
And to pose it to people, especially when, like many times I know your workshops, similar to mine, are to educators or other professionals or leaders.
Yeah.
And I think it's so easy in those roles to fall into that. Our identity is tied into who we are is tied into what we do, right?
Yeah.
And I think that can happen pretty quickly. So tell us a little bit about Stress to Death. Tell us about the overall vision of writing it. What was the motivation for doing it? I think you already probably shared a little bit of that. And then what's kind of, if someone reads Stress to Death, what are they going to walk away with?
Yes. So I've always wanted to write a book since I was a little girl. I wanted to be a swims with dolphins because I didn't know what marine biologist was. And I wanted to write a book. And I really didn't know that anybody could write a book. I thought it was something when I was little that you like went to college to become an author. And, there are different paths to getting there. But as soon as this event happened to me, I started journaling with the idea that it would become a book. And what I called it immediately was lessons learned from dying. They were things that I was experiencing, that I was learning from, and I wanted to catalog in some way. So one of those lessons was that people I thought that would be there for me weren't. And
Mm.
people came out of the woodwork, and the lesson was to invest in the people who invest in you. And so I started collecting all of these lessons. And then, of course, this big awakening with stress and burnout happened. So the book is really a combination of the two things. It's what I've learned about stress, burnout. It's my story of surviving sudden cardiac arrest and the journey over the last 8 years. And then it's interwoven with all of these lessons learned from dying, that I call them, that have to do with trust, vulnerability, wellness, taking care of yourself, and a couple of frameworks for what that would look like, how to hold healthier relationships with yourself and others. It's funny, it's written in my voice. It's not something that I want to be super technical. It's not an academic novel about all of the statistics on stress. There will be some of that because I love research and statistics, but I really just want it to be one of those fun self-help type books where you take something away that resonates with you so that you don't have to go through something awful like I did to learn these lessons. These are things that are applicable to anybody, whether you work out of the home or not, whatever profession you work in, whatever relationships you hold. These are life lessons that anybody can learn from.
And I think just with our conversation today, and then you know, you know, uh, the main direction of Stress to Death is this idea that, as you said, there was under normal. normal warning signs of
Hmm.
someone having a sudden cardiac arrest, you didn't meet any of the criteria, meaning you weren't overweight, there wasn't a history of cardiac issues, any of those things, and so then consequently, it was this idea that the amount of constantly being in fight or flight, constantly being, this what is stress, and then not completing that threat response cycle and what damage it was causing your body. And we don't, we, we talk about it, but we don't talk about it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
people will on a surface, kind of like what our conversation earlier, go, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, I'll take some time off.
Right.
And we don't make it a real priority, and if we do, it's kind of like rushing to go on vacation, right?
Yeah.
And we're we're in this idea that we're rushing to relax, and really we're not relaxing.
Mhm.
We're not
Yeah.
restoring. And so yeah,
Absolutely.
I'm looking forward to reading it. When is it going to be? When's it going to be coming out? When are you going to be releasing it?
The launch should be February.
Okay.
Could be sooner, but I'm hoping for Heart Month for February to keep with my theme. And yeah, that was a perfect summary. That we think a lot about. We hear self-care is a buzzword, particular in education right now, as they say educators aren't okay. They're too stressed. They need self-care. Let's talk to your educators about self-care. And I say it's kind of become a four-letter word. Um, and people think, oh, okay, I'll just take a bubble bath and your problems are not going to be fixed by taking one bubble bath. I say self-care to me is like the tip of the iceberg where a McDonald's Coke makes me happy. That makes me happy in the short term. But if I want to feel better long term, I need to look under the surface. And that's what I call wellness. And that is multidimensional, multi facets. So we were talking earlier about, you've got the spiritual, you've got your relationships, your social pieces, your mental health, and your physical health. And myself included, especially where I was as a 28-year-old, was I thought I was the healthiest person on earth because I worked out and I ate very few calories.
Mhm.
Boom. That's it, everybody. But guess what? I didn't have good social relationships. I, didn't have great mental health, and I was stressing myself to death. And those were huge facets of my wellness that were missing. And I think so many of us jump for those quick fixes, and then we're frustrated as to why they don't work. So this book hopefully gives people an idea of how to lay a better foundation so that you're able to let stress roll off of you more easily, be more resilient, which I know you talk a lot about, Kevin, and be able to get through life and everything that it throws at us. Because the reality is, stress is never going away. You know, there are always going to be challenges. There are always going to be difficult things. Some of us, like me, have challenges thrown at us all the time. And we've got to just realize we got to find a way to be sturdier throughout those challenges.
Yeah. And I think, 100%, using the idea of physical fitness, right? We know that we need to grow stronger, to become faster, to become physically stronger, we need to increase that resistance or increase that stress. But if you're not getting proper nutrition, proper hydration, proper sleep,
Hmm.
the muscle won't recover even though you have added that resistance. So to your point, it's not always, it's what are you doing with the stress? What are you doing with it so to complete that threat response cycle, not trying to outrun the stress.
Yeah, and stress is not a bad thing. Stress in your stress response is within you to keep you alive. The lion chasing you. It's a biological response. But I think I didn't realize, and most people probably don't realize, how much of your body is reacting. And in education, we just kind of brag about how little sleep we get and how we're running on caffeine and how stressed we are. And we wear it in our society like a badge of honor. But internally, your physiological responses are going nuts and your body is deteriorating. So I want to just share what I have learned and hope that it can help somebody and condense the 8-year learning process into one book. But then, like I said, some of these softer stories of how I learned to be more vulnerable and the idea that had I died that day, I don't think anybody would have gone to my funeral. I hadn't really invested in personal relationships. And if they were there, I think the only things they would have said were, wow, she read a lot of books. She really knew what she was doing. She worked really hard. She was the first one to get there and the last to leave, and I say that and it's sad, but I really think it's true. And so now as I live life, I'm constantly thinking about what will they say about me when I'm gone? What is the legacy I leave behind, and do the relationships have value? There's just so much more to it than just the stress piece.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's what, when I was reading over, you had posted something, I think, on LinkedIn and on your Facebook account. And I was reading the little bit of captions about it. I was like, okay, I definitely wanted to touch base with you and talk to you
Yeah.
about it. I'm looking forward to when it does come out. And definitely, as time goes on, we'll have you back on again when it does get released, so that we can let people know where they can purchase it. And if someone wanted to get a hold of you, what's the best way? Because I know you do a lot of things. You teach CPR class. You're heavily involved within the community. What's the best way for someone to reach out and get a hold of you?
Yeah, very easy. Heather's Heart Squad is on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. So Heather's Heart Squad. Um, and that's also a Gmail account. So Heather's Heart Squad, one word, no spaces, at gmail.com is a great email for me. But I'm on all of those socials, and I'll be posting little tidbits about the book and then the official launch date. And it'll be available on Amazon and all the places that you can get books.
Perfect. And if there was one thing for the listeners that you would want them to know from you today, what would you want to send them off with?
I always say learn CPR, but learn CPR, and really, most people only get one life. I was very lucky to get two, maybe three at this point. Make it a happy one, make it a meaningful one. And in my book, I talk about letting go of things that don't bring you joy and happiness. And if there are things you can let go of to have a happier life, don't worry about what society is going to say. You can say, but I got a master's degree in education and I want to quit and open an ice cream store. If that's what you want to do and that's what's on your heart, do it, because life is short and you deserve to be happy.
Perfect. Well, Heather, as always, thank you for being with us today, and look forward to reading your book and us connecting again. So.
Thanks so much for having me.
Just as you were listening to Heather and I talk, and Heather's story about in 2018, having this life-changing experience, and most importantly, what she's done with it since. If this story resonates with you or resonates with someone that you think would benefit from listening to this, please share it. Please share it, and please comment. As always, I thank you for being here, and I look forward to being with you next week.